Hello, and welcome to America's Veterans. My name is Len Sorotsky, and I will be your host. Today, you will meet an airman. He's one of the kindest and most gentle men that I have ever known. He's also one of the most courageous and brave. As a little boy, he dreamed of flying, and at an early age, he did. And then he went to war. He will tell you the rest of that story. So, ladies and gentlemen, please meet a wonderful friend and a true American, Brad Smith. Brad, welcome to the show.
Good to see you again.
Good seeing you, as always. We're going to kind of follow your life from the time you were just a little boy, and then through your grown-up years and bringing right up to today. Okay.
Okay.
I'm looking at some photos that we will share with the audience, and I look at them and I just absolutely adore them. I see you, and tell us about this. You and your.
Oh, I think this picture was taken about 1942 in Lake Milton, Ohio. It's my little sister in the middle and my brother Paul, and I out playing in the yard. It was during the wartime, and things were kind of tough in those times. But besides, we were a little on the poor side, but we didn't know it at the time. So it was a good time.
Say again the name of your town.
Lake Milton, Ohio.
Lake Milton, yeah. Ohio. Okay, and that's where you grew up, and you had dreams.
Yes.
Of flying.
Actually, my dad, after. During this period of time, he already had 3 children, et cetera, but he went in the Army, was required, drafted, and when he came back from the Army, he brought me some little model airplanes with him, little white plastic ones, probably about 2 inches long, and I loved to play with those things. And as I grew, I fell in love with airplanes, and I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. A friend of my dad's had an old Cub, and he came out to the little local grass strip airport and gave me a ride, and that was it. From then on, I've loved airplanes ever since, and I took a ride, and then as I grew up, later on I took flight training, flight lessons, and got my private license, but I'll get back to the chronology.
How old were you then?
I started flying when I was 16.
Uh-huh. Okay, so that's not too different from these times when you were, like when you were in high school, or graduating.
Graduation picture from high school.
From high school, and how often were you flying in those days?
Well, actually, I started flying in my last year of high school, but I was always very active in school. I played football. I was on the varsity football team, basketball, ran and track, so with plenty of activities to keep us busy, plus the studies. I think one of the proudest moments of my parents' life, they're proud of all 3 of us children, but my brother and my sister and I were all in the National Honor Society at the same time, all on the same stage, and academic achievement at that time, besides the sports, etc. But to get back to your question, as soon as I was able to make enough money on my own to be able to afford flight lessons, I did it. My dad was in construction. He was a carpenter. I worked from the time I was 12 years old, summer job and weekends in construction when I wasn't playing football, etc., and saved up my money for flying lessons.
Wow. And I got to keep track of your age now. So you got
do?
you got your license when you were 16.
No, actually, I
Right?
got my license when I was about 18, but I started flying lessons when I was 16.
Okay. And so then after you're out of high school, did you make a decision that you wanted to go serve your country? Is that
Well, actually, I started college in the University of St. Louis in St. Louis, Missouri for aeronautical engineering, but after 2 years of study, well, actually it was less than 2 years, but I took 2 years worth of credits. I ran out of money and decided I'd rather fly them than engineer them. So I left college and worked for another year, and then I went and decided to go into service.
And why, and which, you should tell the audience, which branch of service did you enter?
Well, I wound up in the Navy. I actually had applied for, taken the physical and the written examination, was one of a very small number of guys to be qualified for Air Force pilot training. But at that time, the Air Force was cutting back on pilots rather than bringing new ones in, so they kept delaying my starting date for my training. So
That got you
I
upset.
finally said, enough of that. That's not a good omen. So after a 7-month wait, I decided to go in the Navy and take my chances on becoming a Navy pilot.
So tell me, where are you in that photo, which is absolutely precious?
This is a photo of me as a Navy enlisted man after graduating from boot camp in San Diego. As I went in the Navy, it's a long story and I won't go through all the details, but I went through the regular boot camp in San Diego.
Yeah.
And I had already passed all of the tests except for the current physical for flight training. And I had a terrible cold. My entire company had colds. I couldn't pass the audiometer, so I stayed as an enlisted man, graduated from there, and then I went to jet engine mechanic school in Memphis, Tennessee. And then after waiting the obligatory year, I was able to take the test again and then was selected for flight training. But this was my time as a enlisted man. I was fortunate enough to graduate first in my class from mechanic school and given my choice of duty, so I selected Key West, Florida, and never having been there, but it sounded sexy, so I decided I'd go to Key West.
Yeah.
And
I cleaned it out before you got
that's
there,
a story
Brad.
of its own, but I got there just in time for the Cuban Missile Crisis, so it became an interesting place.
Okay, and so what year was that?
1962.
Yeah. Okay, but I just love this picture. So 1962, you're ready to go,
Yeah.
right? And so tell us, where did you go?
Well, I was selected for flight training, and the Navy flight training program is about 18 months long, but it all starts in Pensacola, Florida. You go there for indoctrination, which is, I can't even remember how long it is now, but I was in the last class of 1962, class 4862. Kind of burned into my memory because you have to know that. Went through the preliminary, all of the physical, the swimming and the marching and all that. But I had a leg up. I'd already been doing all this stuff for a year and a half, so it was a lot easier for me than the guys that coming right out of college had never made a bed. So I just breezed through that quite easily. And then I went from there to primary flight training, and because having already had my license, it made life a little bit easier. So again, graduating close to the top of my class, I was applied for and was accepted for jet flight training, and then I went on from there.
Where did you go for jet flight
Well, I
training?
left Pensacola. I went to Meridian, Mississippi for basic jet flight training. Came back to Pensacola again for initial carrier qualifications. And from there, I went to advanced flight training in Kingsville, Texas, south of Corpus Christi. So I graduated in 1964 in July and was commissioned and got my wings.
Okay, wow. And that's a long time, but still you had an awful lot to learn.
Oh, you have a tremendous amount to learn. You have to learn every airplane is different. You have to learn all the systems, plus you start off from not even knowing which end of an airplane is which,
Yeah.
assuming you have never seen it, been flying an airplane, to high altitude gunnery, to carrier qualifications, to flying supersonic airplanes, etc. So, in fact, it's Navy flight training is very, very selective. If you started off with 1,000 guys of college age, out of that 1,000, you might have 100 who are physically and mentally qualified. So of that 100 that starts, on average, only 33 will ever graduate and get their wings. So
Whoa.
the attrition rate is extremely high.
Wow, and you made it.
And I made it.
Boy, oh boy, that must have been
A lot of sweat
Yeah.
and luck.
And then ultimately you got to see a carrier somewhere.
Well, you see your carrier the first time at the end of basic jet training, and it goes by like a flash. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't even remember what you did, but you did it. So that was in January of 1964. Then I went to advanced flight training, back to carrier qualification again at the end of advanced flight training. So I'd already had some carrier experience by that time.
Yeah. And then take us to the time you were sent somewhere else.
Well, I went from flight training to Oceana, Virginia Beach, and went through training in the A4 Skyhawk. Went from there to my squadron. Went from there to the USS America for 3 months work up in the Caribbean, which is where we do all of our heavy-duty training in preparation for going on what we call a cruise, but it's a 6-month deployment to the Mediterranean. I came back, went on leave, came back to Oceana, my squadron was gone. So they had been transferred to the USS Enterprise, and we were doing another 3 months of workup in the Caribbean in preparation to going to Southeast Asia.
Wow.
To Vietnam. So I joined my squadron in Guantanamo Bay, and we did our 3 months workup, and I was on the Enterprise, USS Enterprise, first nuclear carrier, sailed around South Africa, no stops all the way to Southeast Asia, and we started combat flying in November 1965 in Southeast Asia.
1965. And was that the ship that you were on all the while? That's where you
Yes.
flew from?
Yeah.
And what kind of plane did you have then?
It was the A4 Skyhawk. It was a single engine, single seat airplane, attack airplane primarily. It was a great airplane, a little sports car. Loved it.
And you flew quite a few missions, didn't you? Successfully?
Well, I flew 80 missions. Well, I was on my 80th mission when things didn't go quite so well, and I was shot down over North Vietnam.
But be a little bit more specific, if you can, on that 80th mission. What?
Well, we took off early in the morning, and it was kind of funny. On carriers, all the lights at night are red, and that's to protect the pilot's flight or night vision.
Yeah.
So, and you can't really distinguish colors under red light. So I had gotten up early, like 5 o'clock in the morning. I had gone up and got my briefing and the red lights, etc. Came back to the ready room, realized I had one brown sock on and one white sock. Said, this is probably not a good day, not thinking ahead. And our target was, that morning, we were a flight of 4 airplanes. I was flying as the last man in there, number 4. Was a SAM site, in surface-to-air missile site in North Vietnam. We took off, got in coast. About 6:30 in the morning, it was light. We couldn't go into the SAM site because of fog, so the flight leader had selected our secondary target, which was a bridge near the city of Vinh in North Vietnam. It's only about 5-6 miles inland, but I rolled in as number 4 from 8,000 feet or thereabouts, and the other 3 aircraft had already been over the target, pulled off, and as I rolled in on the target, I got hit in the rear end of the airplane in the tail section and lost control of the airplane. I never did see anything coming up or whatever, but the airplane was on fire, couldn't get the nose up. It was headed downhill at a very steep angle, about 60, 70 degrees, nose down, on fire, spinning. And I remember I was trying to get rid of the bombs I had on board.
Good idea.
So to try to get the airplane light enough, the key is to get the airplane light enough, try to fly it with the trim, and turn back out to sea, which was only, as I say, 5, 8 miles away. So when I did have to eject, I had a chance of being picked up and rescued by our forces. Mm-hmm. But the airplane was not cooperating by that time. And I remember I had my hand up on the handle to get rid of the weapons, to pull the handle. And I remember looking through the front of through the windscreen of the aircraft, and I was at extremely low altitude. Now the corner of my eye could see the airspeed was 600 miles an hour. And so I remember, and it probably took a 1/10 of a thousandth of a second for the thought, but I remember saying to myself, it's too late to get out. But I also remember reaching for the handle. I don't remember ejecting, and I went out. At that speed is like running your head into a brick wall from, running 30 feet and banging your head into a brick wall. Tore my helmet off, my mask, the whole thing. I didn't know that. I was unconscious. And fortunately, it was over a river because of the bridge. And the next thing I felt a tug, which was undoubtedly the parachute popping open. And I think from just that feeling, I probably had a half a swing in the parachute before I hit the water. And I remember waking up about 10 feet underwater and seeing the light filtering down through the water. And we go through a normal routine on flying off aircraft carriers because the airplane could go over the side at any time.
Right.
Of how to get rid of your parachute, which is the main thing, because if that parachute fills full of water, it's going to drag you down and drown you. So get rid of the parachute, deploy your flotation equipment, and get back up to the top of the water. That was like about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was in the middle of this mile-wide or so river. Strange. I could smell the charcoal burning and the dogs barking, and I was in a world of trouble. I pulled out my survival radio, and it wouldn't work, so I threw it away. I had a pistol and plenty of ammunition, but about that time they put out a boat from either side of the river, the north and the south. And the chances of being rescued were slim to none because my radio was trashed. I'd lost my helmet, my neck was bleeding, and my pistol had come up and sliced my neck. So I took my pistol and all my ammunition and figured I wasn't going to shoot these guys with. They're all carrying, there's 6 guys coming out from the south, the ones that got to me first. 6 guys in black pajamas, and they all got AK-47s, automatic rifles. And I'm not going to outshoot them with my 6-shooter, so I got rid of that. They stopped maybe 15, 20 feet away. I already had my hands in the air. They looked at me and I looked at them, and I was probably in shock because I remember thinking to myself, they don't look too happy. And the guy in the front of the boat had his foot up on the edge of the gunnel. And he had obviously been in the war someplace because his whole face was all scars from this. And I mean, I was probably too much in shock to be scared. But, they stopped, they looked at me, I looked at them, and they finally came over, grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and pulled me ashore, and the fun and games started from there.
Okay. So you were not expecting any help?
No, I didn't.
You had a hunch on where you were.
I knew pretty close to where I was, but I mean, that wasn't going to be of any help to me.
And so all you could do was to surrender.
Yeah.
And so they took you ashore and gave you lunch and so on?
Yeah, they
not
gave me lunch,
exactly.
all right.
Yeah. Tell us about.
Well, they pulled me ashore.
Brad,
Excuse me.
so that the audience is going to understand this, we've probably had lots of pilots and others who have had to give in to the enemy and were put in prison.
Yeah.
How long were you in prison?
6 years and 11 months, but I always say 7 years for the sake of argument. You know,
Yeah.
it's.
So you had no idea exactly what to expect, or
I
any of
had
that
none.
sense?
We had no information on how many people had been captured, how many were still alive of that number that had been captured.
Right.
But as a pilot and combat pilot, it's not something you think about.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to sit there and think about, well, I might
You
get
can't do that.
captured or I might
No.
get killed, you'd never fly an airplane,
Okay.
whether you're Air Force, Navy, or whatever. So I always thought, you know, I'd been on flights where unfortunately people were killed. Some of them were my good friends that were killed. And other squadrons, people I knew in other squadrons. So you know it can happen, and it could happen to you, but it's not something you think about.
No. Good. So I know this might be difficult for you, but could you kind of, I don't want to say relive those days, I don't want that, but could you kind of tell us about your experience over 7 years? Like, number one, how did you immediately adjust to the...
Well, as you say, 7 years, it took a week to debrief when I came back, and we don't have that kind of time, but not knowing what to expect. But when I was captured, they took everything I had. At that time, I still had my flight suit, and they took my boots and everything. The only thing I had was a pack of cigarettes, my Geneva ID card, and my U.S. ID card, and my Geneva Conventions card, and a cigarette lighter, and $2 in greenbacks. They took all that, but that was no big deal. But I was injured from my ejection in the fact that wherever my head was at, I couldn't move it. I didn't have any pain, but all the muscles in my neck had been damaged, so I had moved my head by physically moving it. Plus my knee was all torn up from ejection from the lashing, and so within a very short period of time, it was swollen up to the size of a grapefruit. I mean, to the size of a cantaloupe. So, but they started moving me that night after they had gotten me up on top of a hill, and they were doing their preaching in Vietnam of what a bad guy I was and all the rest of it. We only moved at night, and they told me that if you try to escape, we'll kill you.
They weren't kidding.
And they weren't kidding.
Yeah.
No. I still thought about it, and I would have if I'd had the chance. And if I could have run, I would have. But I couldn't even run. So that limited.
But they got a doctor for you right away, didn't they?
Are you kidding? I needed one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. And they moved me from one place to another, marching me all the way north, and occasionally ride on and throw me in the back of a truck, open truck, blindfolded. I had my arms wired behind my back, so I couldn't do anything. And I remember stopping at this one farmhouse, and along the way, I'm going to back up a little bit, but along the way, every village had marched me through. The people would beat on me with clubs, throw rocks, and all that kind of stuff, you know. And the Vietnamese guards, they'd put a pistol up to your head, and you didn't know whether there was a round in the chamber or not, or put you in front of a firing squad and want you to bow or whatever. I wouldn't do it. But so after days and days of this, I was in such bad condition as far as no water, very little food. I didn't care whether they shot me or not by that time, but I was in this one place where we stopped overnight. And the morning came, and I remember the guard there came out and hit me right on top of the instep of my foot with a rifle butt. Now that'll wake you up real, you know.
Yeah.
I was already awake, but what they had, and during the day, because nothing moves in Vietnam, North Vietnam, during the day. No trucks, no nothing, because of the U.S. bombing.
Right.
So it all happens at night. So in the daytime, they hide out. Well, they had an underground bunker with coconut logs on top, and they would throw me in there during the daytime. and it was only about maybe 4 feet deep, dirt, 5 feet. And I remember they pulled me out, and there was a guy, an elderly gentleman there who spoke French, which I spoke some French at the time. I knew enough to what he was asking. He introduced himself and said that he had been part of a capture of another prisoner, which I knew who he was talking about. Can't remember his name right now, but so he started asking me all these questions, and this was actually my first interrogation because it was the first guy that could speak English or French, and I refused to answer anything. So this guard that was guarding me, he was getting more and more agitated and upset by the minute. The old man, he was just kind of, you know. So the guard runs off and gets a club about 3 or 4 feet long and about 2 inches in diameter, and he's gonna beat it out of me if nothing else. And the old man said, no, don't do that. So the old man gets up to leave, and the guard pushes me face first down into this hole in the ground. And I hit the ground, and of course I got my arms wired behind my back, and he's up there swearing a blue streak and whatever he's saying in Vietnamese. And I hear that bolt slide back on that AK-47, and I figured, this is it, baby. Yeah. And he didn't pull the trigger, or obviously I wouldn't be here, but I expected it. And that was the 4th day of my capture. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, whatever reason, World War II lasted for 4 years. I've been here 4 days. I can last another 4 days, and that stretches into 4 weeks, 4 months, 4 years, you name it, down the road. So you always set a little goal out there that you're going to survive another day. And then later on, and then we could talk about when later in my imprisonment, you live one day to the next. You know, the old saying, well, you wake up in the morning in a prison camp, or prisoner of war camp. Yeah. You got nothing. You got the rags on your back, and that's it. You don't have money. You don't have any place to go. You're probably get sick or injured or whatever it may be, and all you can face is a bad day coming up ahead of you. So you don't have anything to occupy your mind except bad stuff. But the first thing you got to do every day, or whenever it's necessary, you say, I'm going to live. And I'll eat garbage. I'll take beatings, I'll take torture, I'll do whatever I need to do, but I'm going to live. But we had one other caveat. We're going to live with honor. We're not going to disgrace ourselves or become collaborators or anything else. We'll die first before we do that, probably. But, you know, the will to live, you got to have it. Yeah. And that's what keeps people going. In the Korean War and other wars, and even in Vietnam, those who gave up died. Yeah. So.
What happened to your wounds? I'm assuming they were not treated for a long, long time. You had no Red Cross. Treated. There was no such thing as Red Cross coming over and caring for you. So
no, they disavowed the Red Cross. They didn't have any. In my case, my injuries were to the point where they healed themselves for the most part. And I still have a bum knee on occasion, depending on what I do to it. And what it was, when I had come back, to jump ahead, but when I came back and I wanted to get back into flying, of course, and we'll talk more about that later, but that knee would give me terrible pain. And sometimes I'd be sitting out there on the runway trying to hold the brakes on the airplane, and you have to use both feet. And if you have to sit there for a long period of time, we don't have any parking brake or anything. I'd have tears in my eyes waiting for the clearance to take off. But then the next day would be fine. Yeah. So, of course, I never told the flight surgeons because they'd ground me, and I wanted to fly airplanes. But so there were some lingering things, and some of the torture I had during that period of time. But anyway, to go back to where I was at, obviously after that first 4 days and the next 4 days, I finally, a week later, wound up in Hanoi. And then the real fun and games started. By that time, I was in pretty rough shape. And they started some serious torture and interrogation and one thing and another. And I won't go through all of that, but they dislocated my shoulders with using ropes, etc. And later on, I was in a camp called the Briar Patch. Well, first of all, I was in solitary confinement. I went to the Hanoi Hilton, the Heartbreak Hotel, which is just a series of little, I don't even know, they're about 4 or 5 feet wide and about 8 feet long, concrete cells, concrete slabs for bed, and they got a set of old rusty leg irons on the one end like they did back in the 1800s. This was built by the French back in about that period of time. That's Heartbreak Hotel, and then from there I went to a camp called the Zoo, which was, I was there, because I was a junior officer, I was in solitary confinement, or solo as we called it, for a couple, 3 months I think. Then I was joined with a guy by the name of Charlie Baldock, who was another pilot off the Enterprise, but in a different squadron. He and I, we were a bad team together. We were young junior officers, and we didn't much care about too much. So we gave him a lot of guff. And wouldn't bow, wouldn't do whatever. So finally one night, midnight, they always like to do things in the middle of the night.
Right.
You know, cell door slams open. Put on your long clothes, which was our interrogation outfit, long prison clothes. Went down to the camp commander's office. Said, "You guys are bad guys, really bad guys, and we're going to send you to the bad guy camp." We said, "No biggie, we can handle that." So they blindfold us, handcuff us, put us on this bus, and we take off for Hilldale and wherever. I don't really have any idea where we went. I know now it was about 40 miles west of Hanoi, out in the middle of nowhere, to a camp that we called Briar Patch. Had no electricity, no water, nothing, except it was walled in, and it had little courtyards, and in each courtyard there was a cell block with 4 cells in it. And you talk about hard times. He was right. This was a camp for the bad guys. They threw us in there. You could touch both walls like this, Charlie and I. And I figured his chances of survival of Briar Patch were about 50-50. The guards just beat the out of you every day, just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
And then when they had an interrogation, I'll tell you a story about that. But I remember it was a tough place. You ate garbage. You either had diet, you always had dysentery. You go 30 times a day. Food poisoning was not uncommon. I've had both at the same time. You talk about a fun ordeal. But anyway, I got to tell you this one story, but I don't want to go into spending too much time on. But the camp commander of the Briar Patch was an elderly Vietnamese, very good strength, very well built for, you know, a small guy. And his name was Frenchie, and he spoke French, obviously. Anyway, so I had an interrogation with Frenchie on several occasions, but this one day he wanted me to write a letter to the troops in South Vietnam to consider to not fight anymore because it was an illegal, you know, all that BS war, and et cetera, et cetera. So I refused to do so. So we're sitting in in his office. He's sitting in a chair at his desk, and I'm sitting on this little concrete block that's about 12 inches off the floor. And I got a guard behind me with a fixed bayonet about 3 inches from my back. Anyway, Frenchie's up there extorting, you know, you ought to do this and this and this and this. And I was playing this game with Frenchie where you just start to lean a little bit. And then he leans, and he leans a little more. And he finally realized what was going on. And I could look at Frenchie. There's another interrogation, I would say a trick, but instead I'm looking at you, but instead of looking you in your eyes, I'm looking at your right ear. Okay, so I'm concentrating on your right ear. You think I'm looking at you, but I'm not. And that's another game you can play with them. Which, well, anyway, 4 hours of this, Frenchie's fed up. He realizes that this isn't working. So he gets up, and by now he's just livid. And he's saying, I was the prison camp commander of the Japanese during World War II, of the Japanese that we captured. And I'm sure he was. And they would do whatever we wanted them to do. I was the prison camp commander in the Indochina War, and we could get the French to do anything we wanted them to do. You blank, 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 Americans are the most stupid people in the world. We can't get you to do anything. And I thought, it's the only time in my entire life I was proud to be called stupid. Well, it went downhill from there. Frenchie came around that desk, took his wristwatch off, and slapped me so hard on the left side of my face, knocked me right off of that concrete block, and the guard was standing there with a rifle, and he was just gonna do me right there. So, as I said, the only time I was proud to be called stupid. Well, from there, it was next to the next cell over for the torture routine, which lasted for the next 3 days. And their favorite trick was they had old French iron handcuffs, which were steel and rusty, etc. You take your arms behind your back, bring your arms up, and lock a handcuff around above your elbow on both sides.
Wow.
And as your arms get tired, those cuffs cut right into the meat, and after a while, your arms start to turn.
Sure.
Your hands start to turn black, and your fingernails swell. Well, that was the routine, and needless to say, I couldn't use my arms for weeks and weeks after that. But I didn't do what they wanted. That was Briar Patch, and as I said, thank God they had to close the camp themselves. It was so bad that the Vietnamese couldn't even stand it out there. So I was there for about 6 months, and they moved us back into Hanoi. But anyway, long story short, I guess the whole gist of it was you had to set goals. You had to do what you had to do as far as eat garbage. Some of the stuff we ate was gag a maggot, to be honest with you. Monkeys are the worst stuff in the world to eat. Just you had to hold your nose with one hand and eat with the other. But when you ate monkeys, rats, I don't know, whatever else, we used to call them swamp weeds, just weeds you'd go out and pick in the ditch someplace. They boil them up. A real treat was a chicken head with the eyes and all of it still in, or the feet or whatever it might be. But anyway, long story short, garbage. But you ate it. You tried to exercise. I was in really good shape when I got shot down. I weighed about 175 pounds, and I was a young man, physically strong. Back at Briar Patch, to go back there. This is like in October, November. I had been to Briar Patch from June to that period of time. And I had a little concrete vat outside the door, and that's where you took your metal steel plate and dunked it in there for clean your plates after your meal. And it was early in the morning. It's a still cold morning. And I look in this vat, and I see this face staring back at me.
Oh, jeez.
And I looked like I had just stepped out of Dachau. Mm-hmm. I probably didn't weigh 115 pounds, and it scared me.
Sure.
I didn't realize how bad I had become. So between the starving to death and all the rest of it, and the torture and the beatings, so you had to put up with that type of stuff. But the main thing was you had to get tough, and you had to really bear down.
Yeah. Again,
we wanted to live with honor. We refused to do whatever it was that they wanted to do. We later, as time went by, now I was the 60th from going back and reconciling the numbers. I was about the 60th guy shot down and captured. But we wound up with 500 and some before it was all over with. So as time went by, and as the days went by and the months and the years, and you keep extending your calendar out there, you learn to put up with the disappointments. You learn to put up with this or that. And then we had our senior ranking officers, and one thing they wanted to do was keep everybody in solitary confinement. but they couldn't after a period of time. We had 2 guys and 3, and then and toward the end, I mean, we had as many as 40 or 50 guys, 60 guys in a cell block. But they didn't want that. They were terrified of any type of communications, any type of organization. And every once in a while there'd be a shakedown, and they would try to find who knows what and who's communicating with what and what's being planned and all the rest of it. And so communication was key to many, many things. And I didn't seek it, but I was somehow developed into, I was one of the key guys in the communications link, in that I could communicate with different cells through all different types of means, flashing a fan, or the deaf mute code, or the tap code. We could tap through a concrete wall. We had our own codes, and we could send entire messages. And then because we had no paper, we had nothing to write anything down with. We had a memory bank, okay? You guys remember it, I'll do the communication. So everybody had to memorize certain parts of it. We had guys that would memorize by alphabet all the people that were in the camp. And one guy'd have A through M, and the other guy'd have M through Z. And so we knew who was there. The Vietnamese were amazed when they finally were able to find out how much crap we'd already knew.
How many camps were you in? Do you have any idea?
Well, I was in Heartbreak Hotel, then I went to the zoo, then I went to the zoo annex. Well, I went to the zoo, and then I went to Briar Patch, back to the zoo annex, to the main prison downtown Wallow, back to the zoo. But there were about 8 different camps, and a lot of guys were in more camps than I was. But I just kind of shuffled back and forth between camps, And there was absolutely, we never could figure out in all that period of time why they moved us.
Yeah.
But as I said,
they didn't want you to get too familiar.
The cell door would slam open in the middle of the night and roll up your stuff, and
you're gone.
They'd take you someplace.
Yeah.
Didn't make any sense.
7 years like that.
Yeah.
Did you ever see any American planes?
No. Well, we heard a lot of bombing.
Yeah.
They'd have attacks, etc., and they'd blow the siren and all the rest of it. There were a few occasions when some people saw airplanes overhead. Now, I personally did not, but there was a lot of activity, anti-aircraft firebombing and all that kind of stuff, almost daily. And then until 1969, and then they stopped the bombing in the north. And I remember when it happened, and I remember thinking to myself, my God, At that point in time, the Vietnamese were really hurting. The guards were stealing our food, and as bad as it was, they were starving to death. And then they decided to stop the bombing for 2 years or whatever it was, and they managed to recover. And I remember thinking to myself, we just added another 2 or 3 years to our time here.
I know there were lots of things happening in the United States in the 60s, Vietnam being one part of it.
Yeah.
But since you didn't even know it was happening back home, so to speak, you wouldn't be aware of what was happening with the civil rights movement? Or
to some degree.
Could you pick that up?
The only inputs we got were new shoot downs. If we were a new shoot down, we'd get some info. But during that 2 year lull in the shooting, in the flying, we didn't get any new inputs. Now they had a propaganda radio, just like Hanoi Jane or Hanoi Hilton or Hanoi whatever, and we had people that were dedicated to listening, but it was to pick out a word or here or there. Of course, they told us all of the things that were bad, about the riots and the demonstrations and all that. That information they were more than happy to share.
Of course.
With nothing of any importance.
Yeah.
So we knew, though, we knew that, there was a lot of turmoil.
How about drugs? Did that reach you guys at all?
No.
No. Says that was a big thing back home at the day, and there are so many Americans who think that we lost the war. Do you think so? Did you? No.
We never lost the war on the battlefield.
No.
Okay. Now, since we left, I guess you could technically say we lost the war, but we never lost a war on the battlefield.
Right.
I have to blame our politicians for their short-sightedness and their unwillingness or inability to really determine what the war was all about and what they were going to do in an appropriate manner, whether it's leave or continue on, which they didn't do.
A lot of people probably don't know you made references several times to French, and I just feel like I should mention the fact that Vietnam was once a French colony, and it was called French Indochina. And when the French went to war, they lost the war. I mean, they lost, but we were committed because at the end of World War II, we said we would support the treaties that were made at the end of World War II, and that whether we wanted to go into Vietnam or not, we were there, and so you guys had to put up with what.
Well, it was also the domino theory, if you remember what that was all about.
Oh,
that
yeah,
if
I know.
this country falls, that country will fall, and
Right.
that was the big one of the big things behind the Vietnam War. I honestly, when I went to Vietnam, I was a trained combat pilot. I won't say I was looking forward to getting into a war, but it was my thing, and I was looking forward to doing my job. We didn't think the war would last more than 6 months.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, obviously, I was grossly wrong.
Little off. But you know, this is. I have to read this quote from General Nguyen Giap, and he said, "What we still don't understand is why you Americans stopped the bombing of Hanoi.
Yeah.
You had us on the ropes. If you had pressed us a little harder, just another day or two, we were ready to surrender." But of course, our politicians were involved in.
What time frame is he talking about?
Well, this was after Tet, so it had to be in the early 70s when he was talking about it. In here, but there has always been this thing about Americans not willing to stand for what they say they believe in, that they're always going to back down. And
I don't believe that to be true.
Well, it may not be true, but Ho Chi Minh, for example, is quoted as saying, "For every one of yours that we kill, you will kill 10 of ours. But in the end, you'll grow tired."
Yeah. That was their whole philosophy.
Yeah.
Well, that's their philosophy. That's the philosophy all of insurgency.
Yeah.
You know, they can't match you on the battlefield, but they will bleed you till you give up.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I hate to say it, but that might be where we're at now in some of the other areas.
Places, yes, indeed.
But the Vietnamese, the way I could see it, you know, their whole mentality, there was a civil war. They didn't care if it lasted for 50 years.
That's right.
It's going to last
They're
for
gonna
50
keep
years,
going.
or 75 or 100.
That's right.
We're in there. We don't have that kind of patience. We're going to win it in 2 years,
Or
we're
2 days.
done.
2 days.
Or 2 days,
Yeah,
maybe. Or we're out of here.
Yeah.
And they could just drag it on forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
And well, that was one of their philosophies. We never really understood as Americans, or at least our politicians, that this was a civil war. We never could get our arms around that. And they weren't going to give up.
Yeah.
You know, McNamara's whole philosophy was, we'll make it too expensive for them to continue. They just laughed about
They
that.
got supplies.
The other part was, and this is a sad part about it to some degree, they were willing to sacrifice millions of people.
Course. Sure.
Millions. I mean, you could wipe out a whole village and they could care less, because
deal.
that's just fewer mouths to feed, all right?
Yeah.
As long as you lost half a dozen people doing it,
Did you ever want to give up?
no.
You
I was
were-
too cantankerous for one
Yeah,
thing.
you were too cantankerous. So yeah, you were
No, I
saying,
had-
well, I might
no.
die here, but I'm not giving up.
I'm not giving up.
Yeah.
You know, you can't stop illness. We had some people that died of disease. We had some people that were tortured to death, and we had some people that, for whatever reason, didn't make it back. But those things you can't control.
Yeah.
But as far as the will to live, you can control that.
How did you get the word that your war was over and you were coming home?
Well, you know, we always had our ear to the wall. Usually the wall was wrong. But I was in the camp called Wa Lo, which is the main Hanoi Hilton complex.
Yeah.
And one of the guards, well, first, I may back up. This is after Christmas of '72. This is
Okay.
before Christmas '72, that period of time, is when Nixon sent the B-52s, the Rolling Thunder, to Hanoi, okay? And you could, I mean, they did a job, and this is what I think Jop was talking about right here.
Yeah.
Now, instead of Hanoi being a protected little or big city, and they had more guns and more missile rings around the defense around Hanoi than they had around Moscow. It was the most heavily defended city in the world as far as missiles, etc.
Huh, amazing.
But once the guards could take their bike and pedal down the next block and see nothing but rubble where there used to be buildings, they would come back the next morning and they were wide-eyed. You know, if it happened 50 miles down the road, who cares?
Yeah.
Now it was happening in Hanoi.
Right here. Yeah.
And they knew, but every night, hour after hour, the B-52s would come rolling in, and sometimes real close. And when they'd bomb, because I mean, if you've never seen a B-52 drop bombs, they drop hundreds of them at one time.
Yeah.
And you could lay there on a concrete floor, and you could feel that floor undulating, just like if you were on a boat on the water. Mm-hmm. Well, to answer your question, after this had been going on for some period of time, one day one of the guards comes over. He doesn't speak any English, and they were forbidden to speak to us in English anyway. But he gives us a signal that Lee Dak-to, who is their foreign minister, and Kissinger ours, he gives us the hand signal that they're signing something in Paris. So that's the first hint, okay? So there's a few more hints along the line, but we know something's up. Not quite sure what it is. A couple of days pass. They now are obviously the agreements had been signed. Mm-hmm. They are obligated by the agreements they take. So we have communication to all of the cell blocks. Okay. And as I said, I was part of the communications network, so I was in the first knowledge of this. The word was passed: if we are brought out there for the reading of the agreements, we will not cheer. We will not make any demonstrations. We'll be military people in ranks. So when they did march us out there, they were obligated to read the whole thing. We stood there at attention. They read it. We didn't do anything else and went back to ourselves. So that kind of surprising because they had all these cameramen there, et cetera, et cetera.
Did they take their shirts back?
No, we still had our shirts.
You had your shirt. Good deal.
Now we still in our normal. It was normal prison routine. I mean, don't get your hopes up too high. You know, they didn't say when. Just that it would happen.
That it would happen.
So, but to back up to some of the things, so we knew something was up. Some time goes by, a week or so, and I'm in a cell block, probably 60 guys in that cell block. Midnight, the doors slam open, in comes the guards with boxes, cardboard boxes, of pants, shirts, jackets, boots, a black plastic travel bag and all this. Well, you've been up and down the hill so many times, you've had your hopes dashed and on, but is this a dream? Yeah. Is this for real?
Yeah.
You know, so we get dressed up, and in some of the pictures you'll see that are here in this book, is the next morning they march us out in our release clothing. First time I'd been out of the camp, no handcuffs and no blindfold. Put us on a bus, drive us through this part of Hanoi. First time I'd seen Hanoi, except from the air or never. Took us to their joint military civilian field called Jialong, which is their jet base. And they took us over to a part of the field that wasn't used. Let us off the bus, got the guards there, of course. Gave us cigarettes and a beer. So we cool our heels there for a while. And as we're there, in comes this Air Force C-141 aircraft. And it's got the American flag up on the tail. It's the first flag I've seen in 7 years. It lands. You know, this is like dreamland after 7 years.
Right.
You know, living grit, dirt, filth, whatever. Put us back on the bus, take us over the other side, take us off. You'll see the pictures. Line us up.
Yep.
We have to go through this formal turnover ceremony. The Vietnamese on one side, the U.S. Air Force on the other side. So they had to sign us off. The Vietnamese sign us out. The Americans signed to accept us. And I remember this one Air Force sergeant so he's leading me out to the airplane. They had we individually, one at a time. And he's got his arm around me and he said, "Let's get out of here before they change their mind." And I said, "Yeah, I hope you can keep up with me." So we get on the airplane. Anyway, long story short, we get out of there, and I remember looking out the window and seeing the coastline of North Vietnam fading behind the tail. And as I have mentioned, it was the most euphoric moment of my life, bar none. I have to admit that was the happiest I've ever been. I had a chill went down my back, and people have gone back to Vietnam and one thing and another, and have been treated royally, treated extremely well, treated great. But I've never had the desire. Every time I think about it, I get a cold chill comes back.
I can see why.
Not for me.
No,
but then from there, that was came back to the United States. I was the first guy to come back to the state of Florida. This was I was released on 12th February. Went from there to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. They did a real quick medical on us, gave us uniforms. From there to Hawaii, to an air base that escapes me right now. It was one of the big logistics places in California, east of San Francisco. And from there, I caught a ride with 3 admirals and their airplane. From there to Jacksonville, Florida. I arrived in Jacksonville. The only reason I took Florida was because I had family here. And I arrived in Jacksonville, Florida on the 15th of February. I was the first guy back to the state of Florida. And they didn't know what to expect, and neither did I. But I spent a week there. After the first day, I was an outpatient. They let me go over to the BOQ. But it was a long story short. They had bars on all the windows and everything. The hospital commander, who I still know and respect greatly today, he was a Navy captain, came up, and he and I had a drink, and he said, "This wasn't my idea." He said, "They made us do it. We didn't know what to expect if you jump out the window. But I tell you, if you want to go up on the next floor, there's no roof. There's no bars on the roof." That's the kind of guy he was. But anyway, so I had a whole hospital floor to myself. They emptied the entire 6th floor of the hospital in Jacksonville because they didn't know what. Well, to retrace it back, when we got on the airplane in Hanoi, they had baby food and all this kind of stuff because they didn't know if we could eat or anything. We get to the Philippines, no dairy products for however long. Some guys have been there 7 years, 8 years, whatever. Everybody wants milkshakes, ice cream, steak and eggs, you know. They opened up the dining room, restaurant for us, 1 o'clock in the morning. Whatever you want to eat, we'll cook it for you.
And you had no problems eating?
I had no problems eating. When I was a few months, about a year or two before I came back, I got down to the point, as I said at one point in time, we were running out of time, but got down to the point at one point in time I probably weighed about 115 pounds. But I ate and I exercised 4 hours a day, push-ups, sit-ups, whatever I could do. Slowly built my strength back up. The Vietnamese started feeding us better toward the end, to fatten us up to go home, I think. We had started getting Russian canned fish and stuff like that. And by the time I got home, I weighed maybe 150, 155 pounds, but I was strong. And so of the 150 or so Navy guys, because most of ours were single-seaters in the Air Force, they multiple-seat. There was only a little over 150 Navy guys, and some of those were backseaters. But to make a long of that entire number, there were only about 12 or 15 of us that wanted to go back to the cockpit, to go back to the fleet flying off aircraft carriers. I was one of those numbers, so I got back to Jacksonville. They gave me all this physicals type stuff. And we were required to take 3 months of R&R, whether we wanted to or not. Came back in September of that year, and I was approved to go back to flight training. Went back to a short refresher jet training course, and I was back in the cockpit, 8 months afterwards, and went back to fleet aircraft flying on the Saratoga, on the USS Saratoga, flying the A-7, and continued my career.
Unbelievable story, Brad. Really is. And I'm not going to try to read all of this, but I think the audience should know that while Brad was in prison, he actually wrote in his head a poem, a lengthy poem. And part of it, I'll just read you a couple little stanzas. They've struck at me because they hate, because I won't bow down. They've used their might to humble me, to force me to the ground. I've reeled beneath the blows they've struck. My body has cried out, but pain can never change my heart, can never make me doubt. What an American. What an American, really. Your story and those 7 years out of your life are over. They're gone. You got a memory of them, but they're really gone. And,
yes,
and once you came back here, you started getting involved in a whole bunch. I'm talking about after you got out of the Navy, when you finally got into your civilian clothes. We tell us about some of the things that maybe you could start with this picture at the downtown church. And
well, I will, but first of all, as I didn't tell you, but I spent another 12 years in the Navy, flying all the way up to the day I got out. My expertise was in aircraft maintenance, but also in weapon systems development and testing. I was a test pilot. So I went in the aerospace business for 6 years and continued the same thing I was doing in the Navy there. Got tired of that routine, moved back to Bradenton in 1990, and have been here ever since. But this pictures, we have several of them here.
Yes,
of
we do. And the audience will see these.
First Baptist Church downtown, which I had started the stained glass business. It's a totally different field than I'd ever been in before. But I loved it, and I actually started it as a hobby when I lived in California. So by the time I had started it, I already had close to 10 years experience in stained glass work. So I've done thousands of jobs throughout the county, mostly residential, doors, entryways, sidelights, transoms, you name it.
Name your company.
Lamps, New World Design stained glass.
New World Design stained glass.
But the opportunity presented myself to redo all of the, reconstruct, redo all of the windows for the First Baptist Church downtown. They were in terrible condition. The church was built in 1912, and the lead was shot, the windows were shot, not as square. So I really didn't want the job, but once I got to meet the people, and they said, they were desperate, and they wanted to have their windows repaired, and I said, it's beyond that. You're just throwing your money away. You take every window out, take them all apart, rebuild them, and I'll do it for you. I gave them a price. Unfortunately, they accepted, and for the next 2 years, I rebuilt 100 and whatever it was, 120, and then 40 or 30 new windows, etc. So it was about 150 windows. But it was a long job, but this was probably the big. Well, it was the biggest job I've done in the area. Well,
but you did other jobs, and I have to draw the audience's attention to this piece that you have. Here, you used to have it. I own it now. I bought it at an auction at a fundraising a number of years ago, and the title of it is Taps, 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 and it certainly looks like peace to me. And
it was a piece I had done quite a number of years before, but it appealed to me. It's a very peaceful.
That's exactly.
Scene.
That's what I meant. That kind of piece.
obviously the theme of it is to move onward up to heaven through peace. And I always liked it, and I'm glad that you have it to enjoy.
It is mine. And now the audience must know about your wonderful wife and your family. So could you say a few words about?
Well, Kirsten and I have been married for, let me get this right, because if I don't, 37 years coming up. I met her after I came back from Vietnam. I took a trip to Europe. I met my wife there. We've been married ever since. The Navy life was new and everything to her, but she did a fantastic job. And we have one daughter who lives in the local area, Connie Asher. 4 grandchildren, which takes up a big part of our life by choice. And my other passions are still flying and fishing, etc.
Yeah.
So I think you have some pictures
well,
there.
the audience is going to see this too, because I think you still do. There are some things that Brad does in Manatee County. We're so blessed to have him here with us. He's not only the wonderful guy that I promise you he is, and so he gives presentations and tells maybe not quite so long a story, but he tells his stories at schools and has been a speaker to almost everywhere in town. And then down in his basement, so to speak, the audience will see these too. Brad's building an airplane.
Yes.
So that will bring to a close today's issue of America's Veterans. I wish to thank our very, very special guest, Brad Smith. Thanks also to the METV staff for making this program possible. Most of all, I thank you, each and every viewer, for taking some of your valuable time to join us. Please remember that freedom has never been, nor will it ever be, free. If you are enjoying the freedoms that you have today, thanks, a vet. Before we leave, I want you to know that when Brad finally did come home, he came home with this assortment of medals. And they include 2 Silver Stars, the Legion Merit, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, a Meritorious Service Medal, 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, 5 Air Medals, and 1 Navy Commendation Medal. Thank you so much, Brad.
Thanks, Len.
Thank you.